Welcome to Crossroads. In today's episode, we'll be talking about how the United Nations is being accused of joining a terrorist network through UNRWA. And it's causing some pretty big disturbances internationally because of this. We talked about this before. It's now being exposed. Also, I want to clarify some reporting yesterday on the $9,000 being given to illegal aliens in Chicago for housing vouchers. Just a correction, it is not $9,000 a month. They're giving them $9,000 vouchers that they can use to rent a house and then buy furniture and stuff. Who knows if it will continue, but I'll be going into the details on that as well because it's still pretty wild. Now look, first of all though, on the United Nations, they're being accused right now of having ties to terrorism. And this comes amid news that 12 members of the United Nations Relief and Works Agency, that's UNRWA, which is a Palestine-focused branch of the UN, they were allegedly involved in the October 7 terror attacks on Israel. President Donald Trump had previously cut funding to this UN agency under concerns that, well, it had ties to Palestinian terror networks. And of course, there's been a lot of controversy on it since, but they're still operating and that might change soon. We'll see. Fox News said in response to accusations that staffers of a United Nations agency were allegedly involved in the October 7 attack on Israel, Texas Republican Representative Michael McCall reminded Americans that former President Donald Trump cut funding to the UN agency during his administration. And he said, quote, "The United Nations Relief Agency, the previous Trump administration cut all funding for a reason, just for this reason. The idea that UNRWA was actually supplying, harboring weapons to assist with Hamas's invasion of Israel." That's the United Nations, folks. Now, McCall said this in a Fox News interview, and he continued by stating, "Now, those are the allegations that have come out of Israel. We're investigating, but if true, think how outrageous that is." And currently, as of Saturday, the United States, the United Kingdom, and other Western powers have now cut funding to the United Nations Relief and Works Agency, which is again called UNRWA, which is intended to provide relief and humanitarian services to Palestinian refugees. Now, you might note previously on Crossroads, we had an interview with Karis, one of the producers of American Thought Leaders, who has worked on reports and such about UNRWA. And one of the things that was raised with UNRWA is the way that they game the humanitarian system in order to make it appear there's a larger crisis in Palestine than there actually is. They maintain the refugee status of every person. And because they do that on the books, it looks like they're dealing with a much larger crisis than they are. They get additional funding, they get additional programs, they can go and make a stink on the evening news, and this is how they game the system. Meanwhile, many members of UNRWA have many times been exposed of having ties or expressing open support for Hamas and other terrorist organizations. It's been known for a very long time that they have this type of pro-terrorism leaning. And of course, all of this is following accusations currently that 12 staffers of the group were involved in the attacks on Israel just recently. Now, Fox continues by stating the State Department under Trump had cut ties with UNRWA back in 2018. But guess what happened? President Joe Biden resumed the funding to the group shortly after he took office, as well as at the World Health Organization and other branches of the UN. It notes that he continued to increase spending to the organization with funds exceeding $1 billion. You getting that, folks? We gave $1 billion to a pro-terrorist organization of the United Nations that was known to have these types of ties that the United States had eliminated their funding to previously because of these types of ties. Biden gave them $1 billion, more than that. And what happens? Well, just like we unlocked $10 billion for Iran and suddenly global terrorism starts up again, we gave $1 billion to UNRWA and suddenly the Palestinian terrorists through Hamas launch a terrorist attack on Israel. Wild times, right? Now, that being said, I mentioned that the ties of terrorism to UNRWA have been an ongoing concern. And I want to show you some evidence on this, just so you know I'm not just saying it. Many organizations have warned about UNRWA previously, including notably the fact that many members of this United Nations organization publicly support terrorism. This is a report from UN Watch. It says this: UN Watch continues to find abhorrent anti-Semitism and support for jihadi terrorism by UNRWA staff on social media. And this report details how UNRWA teachers in a 3,000-member UNRWA staff Telegram group cheered and celebrated Hamas's October 7th massacre, while at the same time asking when their UNRWA salaries will be paid. In other words, they'd be like, hey, congrats on murdering all those civilians. Hey, good job. They're saying like praise Allah. And so if you read the texts, they're public. If you read it, they're like saying praise Allah, and they're celebrating, right? Then they're like, hey, when do we get our United Nations paychecks after this and in light of the attacks? It notes that the UNRWA staff in the group shared photos and video footage of those events, the terrorist attacks, and then prayed for the terrorists' success and for Israel's destruction in clear violation of UN rules. You can't make this stuff up, folks. And of course, I won't go over the whole thing, but this report from UN Watch includes excerpts and examples and screenshots of all those different messages that UNRWA members, the United Nations organization members, were making on their private Telegram channel to openly support terrorism and celebrating it. All right, that said, I want to talk about something else. I discussed yesterday how the Biden administration is giving taxpayer money to the United Nations, to various NGOs, which are then helping facilitate the mass human trafficking of illegal immigrants into the United States, and then facilitate their resettlement right here as our new neighbors. And we discussed also how recent United Nations documents show how illegal immigrants are being given debit cards, prepaid cash cards, even just straight up envelopes filled with money as part of the process of them being trafficked to the United States. They're paying them. And I mentioned at the same time, at the state level, illegal immigrants are also being given free housing, free food, and various other services. And all of this, from the NGOs to the United Nations to the resettlement operations right here in the U.S., American taxpayers are shouldering most of the cost for every single level of this. We are paying for our own destruction. The government's sending us a check for our own noose. And of course, I mentioned as well that in Chicago, the illegal immigrants are being given $9,000 vouchers. I should briefly clarify, I made an error on this yesterday. To clarify, these are not monthly payments. They're not getting $9,000 a month. But according to reports, the $9,000 they're getting, because they are getting it, it's a 6-month payment to the illegal immigrants in Chicago that they can then use to go rent an apartment and then buy furniture and other things for their apartment. In other words, they're giving them a $9,000 voucher to go and rent a place and then, buy whatever furniture they want for it. We would assume that in addition to that $9,000 for that 6 months of whatever they use it for, that of course, it's going to run out eventually, and we'll see if that means Chicago keeps having to pay rent for them after that $9,000 wears out. But of course, this is not every single month, to clarify. But let me show you what's happening, because this is still pretty wild. Daily Mail had this. They said Chicago is giving $9,000 in rental assistance to migrants in need of temporary housing after it paid a medical firm a staggering $7.2 million for staffing shelters for just 1 week. It says this is according to official records. Now, the Windy City, Chicago, is struggling right now, they say, with over 11,000 migrants in shelters and 4,000 staying in police stations and the O'Hare International Airport after more than 18,000 have arrived in the city in 1 year. Now, I should clarify, they're making a big deal. 18,000 people. You have like more than 200,000 arriving every month. The Biden administration, in their negotiations with Republicans, wants to legally, or semi-legally, allow 150,000 roughly illegal aliens to enter the U.S. every single month before they even start enforcing border laws. Now look, it says further in, to free up much needed room in these shelters, right? Because they have to give spaces to all the illegal aliens. The state of Illinois, because Chicago is there, is helping cover the costs for temporary housing for migrants, including $9,000 in rental assistance over a 6-month period. Chicago's Deputy Chief of Staff, Christina Paccione Zayas, told Fox 32. It says the funds include assistance with moving costs and a starter kit to furnish their apartments. It says the city has allocated $4 million to help migrants find temporary housing, and the state has contributed another $38 million. It's unclear how many migrants are currently benefiting from the program. In other words, they're telling us a little bit, they're not telling us everything. We don't really know the full details, let alone, again, as I mentioned, what happens when that money runs out in 6 months or less, because you're also basing this on the concept that they're spending the money responsibly and not sending it home in remittances to pay off their, traffickers and so on, or give to their families. Now, of course, this money does not cover the many other free programs that the illegal immigrants are getting. So the $9,000 each of them gets is not the full amount that they're receiving. They're getting more because, of course, it takes place in other forms. And also, it is unclear whether the cities will continue paying them for their free housing after those 6 months are up. But you have seen cases where illegal immigrants are getting booted out of some of the places where they're squatting or the shelters and so on. And that's becoming a big controversy in some of these states because we're in a weird place in the United States right now. Remember during COVID, where people paying rent, if you were delinquent on your rent, you were not held liable for it, which was a major, serious blow to landlords. Imagine you're a landlord and you're maybe an elderly man or woman, and you make your money, your ability to buy groceries every month maybe comes from the rent money. And suddenly the people renting from you no longer have to pay you because the federal government told them they don't have to. And suddenly all the properties you used to get money from, you still have to pay the bills and everything on top of it, but you're no longer receiving money from these individuals. The government legalized squatting, and they legalized the ability, in many cases, of individuals to move into an apartment, never leave, and not pay rent. And that's going to become a real problem as you have illegal immigrants who cannot work in many cases, or just plain old don't want to work because they're getting government handouts, who are in apartments and cannot be evicted. And look, there's a bit more on that program in Chicago that, again, is giving them $9,000 for rent. Epoch Times said the new program is on top of additional funding that has already been set aside to help illegal immigrants. In May, the Chicago City Council announced that $51 million in financial aid from the budget would go toward addressing the flood of immigrants. And it says, meanwhile, residents who see their fellow Chicagoans still living on the streets are outraged over what they consider a criminal misdirection of funds. Because look, Chicago has one of the highest murder rates in the country. Chicago's not doing so hot. Chicago has a lot of problems domestically. And, if you talk to a lot of people who support big government and high taxes, they'll often bring up the issue, you want to lower taxes, but who's going to pay for the schools? Think about the children. You have schools that don't have air conditioners, and these poor inner city children who live in poor neighborhoods that do not have the budget from taxpayers to properly, provide the services they need, are living in difficult conditions, and it's impacting the future of these neighborhoods because kids get a poor education, they drop out or graduate on a poor education, and they find that there's no opportunities for them. And so they say to fix the problem, fix the schools. And you need taxpayer dollars to do that. But what does it mean when cities right now, like Chicago and other places, rather than use our tax money to help the locals, rather than use our tax money to help, needy children and, give air conditioners to public schools and maybe provide basic food services, are instead using that money to give free handouts to people violating the law to illegally enter the United States and put themselves up in all the nice places, which notably because there is a limited supply of housing. And of course, the way that supply and demand works is that if there's higher demand and a lower supply, prices are going to skyrocket. This means that the cost of living in all these places is going to increase. The cost of rent is going to increase, especially as government is subsidizing the ability of people to pay their rent. And as the cost of rent increases, and if the homes are being given to, illegal aliens instead of American citizens, you can expect a lot of American citizens to get pushed into homeless shelters, to maybe become homeless, or to barely get by, especially in poor neighborhoods like this. And on that note, the program is deeply controversial in Chicago. A lot of people are very unhappy about it because, again, one of the big narratives of the left typically is that, we need these taxes, we need high taxes, we need to tax the millionaires and the billionaires, as Bernie Sanders might say it, in order to make sure everybody is just okay, everybody is getting the things they need. And rather than provide the things that American citizens need, the government is redirecting those funds to just free food, free handouts, free schooling, free houses, free cars in some cases, to illegal immigrants. And of course, the people who are in a difficult situation in Chicago, a lot of the poorer communities, especially a lot of the black communities, they're very angry about this. And there's a lot of videos of people angry about this. American citizens are not being given the types of benefits that the illegal aliens are getting. And citizens who live in poor conditions are now having to sit back and watch as the government and the local government just gives free handout after free handout to the illegal immigrants in front of them that they're not eligible for. And the money for that is not like the local city council in Chicago is working extra hard to generate more wealth. No, they're using your money. They're using American tax dollars. The government is not generating wealth. They're taking wealth and taking that wealth and giving it to people who aren't even American citizens in this case. Giving it to people who should be deported, actually, people who are in violation of American law. And so, wild times we're in, right? Now, also, given all of this, you have something else pretty big happening right now. The Department of Homeland Security Chief Alejandro Mayorkas could soon be impeached. And the House Republicans are, of course, working on this. As always, it's split, Democrat, Republican. You're always going to have that, even on controversial issues like this. Things that typically the Democrats would kind of agree on. It's just politics, right? But right now, again, there's a push to impeach Mayorkas, the head of the Department of Homeland Security. Washington Examiner says this, and I'll explain why this really matters, actually, but let me say this first. It says the House Homeland Security Committee will take up articles of impeachment for willful and systemic refusal to comply with the law and breach of the public trust against Mayorkas, according to the committee. And this is, of course, because Mayorkas, as a federal government employee tasked with securing America's borders, is delinquent in his duties. Rather than secure America's borders, he is helping facilitate mass illegal immigration into the U.S. And this is, of course, causing serious abuse, I would say, of the American people, crime, lack of funds, humanitarian crisis, child trafficking. There's a lot of missing children now, tens of thousands of them, and really just causing, problems of probably what could be gangs and maybe irreversible crime in the United States across the whole country. Now, they say that these, not to mention terror threats, especially as we're getting pulled into a global terror war yet again. Now, they note this. These articles lay out a clear, compelling, and irrefutable case for Secretary Alejandro Mayorkas' impeachment, said House Homeland Security Chairman Mark Green, a Republican. And he said this in a statement, continuing, he, as in Mayorkas, has willfully and systemically refused to comply with immigration laws enacted by Congress. He's not following the law. And notes that he has breached the public trust by knowingly making false statements to Congress and the American people, and obstructing congressional oversight of his department. Secretary Mayorkas has also completely disregarded the separation of powers, a bedrock of our constitutional republic. And good for them for noting America is not a democracy. We're a constitutional republic. And they continue stating, Congress has a duty to see that the executive branch, the federal government, implements and enforces the laws we have passed. And he continued, "It is time we take this affront to a co-equal branch of government, to the Constitution and the American people seriously. The House of Representatives must impeach Secretary Mayorkas." Now, before I go into my take on this, Mayorkas is saying otherwise, and here's what he's saying. Fox News says that Homeland Security Secretary Alejandro Mayorkas on Tuesday took aim at what he called baseless and false accusations leveled against him by House Republicans ahead of a key vote on impeachment articles in the House Homeland Security Committee. And he said, quote, "I assure you that your false accusations do not rattle me and do not divert me from the law enforcement and broader public service mission to which I have devoted most of my career and to which I remain devoted," he said in a lengthy letter to House Homeland Security Committee Chair Mark Green. It notes the committee is meeting to advance 2 articles of impeachment against Mayorkas, accusing him of refusing to follow immigration law again and of breaching public trust. They're going to be working on this. It's probably going to move forward, but further in it states that Republicans are accusing him of a dereliction of duty, as well as to the Biden administration overall. It notes that migrant numbers officially hit 302,000 people in December, in 1 month, which is a new record after 2.4 million encounters in the fiscal year 2023, last year. 2.4 million people illegally entering the United States based on the ones we know about, because these are encounters, meaning it does not include the so-called gotaways, the ones who are not accounted for. It notes that Republicans have said that large release into the interior of the United States and a rolling back of Trump-era policies have fueled the crisis. Because, of course, Trump was talking about building the wall and deporting people and enforcing border rules. Now, look, my take on this. It's going to be very difficult for Mayorkas to defend this, given the fact that this is all now being exposed. It's going to be hard for him to say that he is not being delinquent on his duties because, part of the narrative was it's not I who have opened the border. It is merely the, fault of these illegal immigrants who we're trying desperately to process, and we have a lack of money. As we know, the money the Biden administration wants is not going to defend the border. Instead, it's going to people processing the amnesty claims and, basically running the Disney lines coming into the U.S. That's all they're doing. They're processing people coming into the United States illegally, and they're gaming the, of course, amnesty system. They're gaming the parole system. And by using these legal loopholes, the Department of Homeland Security and the Biden administration overall are facilitating the mass illegal immigration of the United States from these countries. At the same time, they're using taxpayer dollars openly now. We now know, even though they've denied it repeatedly, they're using taxpayer dollars to finance and bankroll and coordinate the siege of the United States, the raiding of the United States. They are working through the International Organization for Migration, as we discussed yesterday, which is under the United Nations. They're paying them, they're giving them money for them, and they're even looking at a 3-fold increase of the budget to the UN to run these mass illegal immigration operations into the United States this coming year, which means this coming year could see maybe 3 times as much as we did last year. And keep in mind, last year was like 2.4 million people illegally entering, larger than the population of many U.S. states. Democrats are defending Mayorkas and Biden's policies. They're standing by him. But remember, many Democrat cities are facing serious issues with the open border program. It's not a popular program even among Democrats. But the narrative they're pushing to defend themselves, the Democrats, on this is they're saying the cause of the problem is Texas, because Texas is sending busloads of illegal immigrants into other states. And on Biden's repeated claim that he needs the approval of congressional budgets to secure the border. Again, those narratives don't hold up now. The argument that it's Texas's fault for sending busloads of illegal immigrants across the country, it's not holding up because Texas tried securing its border They tried building barriers and tried deporting people, and they are making laws locally that allow them to charge illegal aliens with, crimes for entering Texas. The Biden administration is suing them. The Biden administration has given orders to Border Patrol to go and cut the wire, to go and remove border barriers. And the federal government under the Biden administration, the Democrats, is actively trying to eliminate border security in the open now. And so it's hard for them to keep that narrative going. At the same time, we now know that the argument of them needing more money to, fix the problem is a lie, because we can look at what they're asking, to the money to be used for, which is, again, not to secure the border, but to instead put more people in place to process the illegal immigrants, to allow them into our country. And we also know on the argument that, this is, let's say, Texas's fault. We know the Biden administration, through the State Department and other branches of government, is financing the entire operation to have the United States flooded with illegal immigrants. And of course, this is causing real problems for Americans. If you talk about delinquency of duty, the fact that the officials tasked, one of the few tasks of the federal government, tasked with securing the United States, with securing our borders, with making sure Americans are not being abused by foreign powers, they're delinquent in that duty. And as this happens, Americans are facing crime waves. Americans are being victimized. Americans are facing serious problems. Homelessness, skyrocketing rents, higher costs of living. At the same time that you have crime waves, you also have the woke, anti-police movements pushed under the defund the police policies of the Democrats, which they're trying to put on Republicans now, by the way. And of course, you're seeing the effects of this. One example in Vermont, Front Page Magazine said that shootings right now are up 185% from 2021 to 2022. And the Burlington mayor, Miro Weinberger, is complaining about this, saying, "We are not used to this level of violence in Vermont." They say that the city racked up another 5 murders just recently. And it says that may not be much, but it gives the normally sleepy city where Bernie Sanders got his start a higher murder rate than Philadelphia. It notes, when James Eaton, a mentally unstable leftist who had praised Hamas, shot and wounded 3 Arab Muslim men outside of his home, the media eagerly diverted attention from the crime wave to the shooter, who was conveniently white, while falsely blaming it on Islamophobia. The discredited hoax, because it turned out to be fake, was not only trying to rally support for terrorists, but also to distract attention from the real perpetrators of the violence that has overtaken Bernie Sanders' old city. It notes further in, the shooters in Burlington, Vermont, are much more likely to be Muslim male teens. Another recent shooting in the Burlington area, made the national news when Hussein Mohammed, the underage son of a Somali immigrant who didn't speak English, shot and killed Madden, a local 14-year-old boy. It was reported that state police were unable to make an arrest despite at least 2 eyewitnesses from the car providing multiple false statements about the crime. Because remember, if you profile a criminal now, you may be guilty of discrimination. If you're like, it was a man, they're like, what is a man? Imagine the police dispatcher. How dare you misgender the criminal? How dare you assume their gender? I believe the individual was a Somali immigrant. How dare you, you racist? This is the kind of stuff we're dealing with right now. And again, it's causing some real problems. We're going to get to the point where people are going to have to call in crimes. Like, can you identify the suspect? And unless it's like, oh, he was a white Christian male, that's the only one that's allowed. You can't say gender, you can't say race, you can't describe features. They're going to be looking for like an individual, possibly human, when they do the police searches at this rate. Now look, even Democrat cities though are reaching a breaking point with this. They cannot withstand the pressure being placed on them, which makes you again wonder why the Biden administration is so dead set on increasing and maintaining the raid of the United States. Chicago Mayor Brandon Johnson, according to Town Hall, implemented a new policy that gives illegal migrants a 60-day shelter limit before they're forced to take up space elsewhere. Now remember, part of this is they're giving people like $9,000 to go rent apartments and buy furniture. But this is causing other issues as well, mainly because of the whole squatter rights thing that's been introduced into America. But it notes that the city's 16 aldermen include close allies of Johnson, sent a letter to the mayor urging him to terminate his policy, claiming it poses a significant threat to the health and safety of new arrivals. In other words, they're saying you cannot evict these people. Even if the mayor's like, we don't have the money, we're going to go bankrupt, and the entire city's going to go belly up. We cannot pay the living expenses of this many people who want to come here and live for free. And the woke individuals within the party itself are saying, you can't do that. You have to give everybody a house, and if you evict them, you're an evil Nazi or something. Now, it notes the policy was due to take effect in mid-January, but it was delayed due to the city's very, very, very cold temperatures. It says further in that at least 2,000 illegal immigrants are set to be evicted if the policy is enforced by February 1st. The number is expected to grow to about 6,000 people by the following week. And the letter argues the city must delay evictions until the warmer months and instead focus on helping illegal aliens become independent. It says since 2022, at least 608 buses have arrived in Texas by Governor Greg Abbott. Again, they're blaming Abbott for this, with more than 34,000 illegal immigrants landing in Chicago. And note here, by the way, the numbers change from media to media. One media will be like 14,000 in Chicago, and it'll be like 16,000 in Chicago. This one's saying 34,000 in Chicago. Frankly, I don't believe any of their numbers. I don't believe any of it, because they change depending on who you go to. I don't think they even know personally, and I think maybe those who do know are trying to prevent us from knowing. There's a very weird cover-up on the government, state government, and federal government level on how big this problem is and what it actually means for us as we head deeper into it. We don't fully know the details on this. And of course, House Republicans are trying to get information on all of this, but they're not able to because people like DHS Secretary Mayorkas are refusing to give Congress information when they request it. Look, if this was tables turned and the Democrats are the ones leading Congress, they'd be charging these people with crimes for refusing to testify, for refusing to provide evidence. You know, this contempt of Congress charge that notably some Trump team guys are going to prison for now. They're putting Navarro in prison for this right now. Literally, he got charged with it. He's going to go to prison. But further in it notes, as of January 16th, there were 28 shelters in operation within the city of Chicago, holding roughly 14,967 immigrants. And on February 1st, 7,842 illegal immigrants will receive eviction notices. And now we know they're also receiving $9,000. They're receiving $9,000 to go and rent a place. And I guarantee you they're going to have a problem with these illegal immigrants who believe that they deserve and they're entitled to free houses and free cars and free food and free schooling and free furniture and free everything else. They're going to put their arms up and say, I'm not moving out. I can't pay my rent, but I'm not going anywhere. And Chicago is going to have to deal with the problem of basically squatters in these apartments. It's going to make the housing problem very serious there. Just watch. Now, briefly, I mentioned my take on Alejandro Mayorkas, the DHS secretary, and given the various issues we're watching. In my opinion, the case to impeach him is very strong, and they're probably not going to be able to impeach him at both the House and the Senate. More than likely, Democrats are going to circle the wagons around Biden because Biden is blaming Republicans in Congress for not passing the budget, and he's saying that's why we can't secure the border. Again, it's not true, but at least it's not true. Not even in my. It's just plain old not true. He's lying, frankly. He wants to facilitate illegal immigration, not stop it. So it's a lie. He's not being honest. At the same time, they're also blaming Texas for it. They're not going to get off their lie. They're not going to admit that they're lying. frankly, because it's politics, and this is just part of the political battle we have right now. Even though you do have a lot of Democrats noting the problem is getting out of hand, I should note. My point being, when it comes to the push to impeach Alejandro Mayorkas, the benefit of this for Republicans is not so much to, actually impeach him. Maybe Biden would appoint somebody even worse, right? That's very possible, frankly. The value in this is that the impeachment inquiry process will allow Congress to carry out deeper investigations. They'll be able to issue subpoenas for documents. It'll be much more difficult for the Biden administration to block that process. They'll also be able to call in witnesses more easily. And as they call in witnesses, we'll be able to get publicly, of course, testimony, documents, details, and the information we've been trying to get for a very long time on why the Biden administration is doing this. What makes them care so much about bringing in these illegal immigrants that they're willing to bankrupt New York and Chicago and everywhere else? That they're willing to, in front of welfare recipients in the United States, give free money and free houses and free everything else to non-citizens right in front of their faces. That while America is facing a fentanyl crisis and increasing homelessness and other issues like this, they don't seem to be interested in the welfare of American citizens. We're going to get answers on why it's so important to them, that they are willing to carry that out, that it's more important to them than that. And we're also going to be getting details on just how many individuals they are, just maybe where these missing children are going, because we know the unaccompanied minors are being given to unknown individuals. Some of the houses that children are being sent to turn out to be vacant lots. There's nothing there. And when the authorities try to make phone calls to find out, hey, where'd this child go? And nobody answers the phone twice, they give up and the child is deemed lost. You have probably mass child sex trafficking, maybe slave labor, and a lot of other problems starting up. And we would assume the federal government at least has some knowledge of this. The impeachment inquiry will allow Congress, if they so choose, to look into these issues, to be able to get the details that are being withheld from the public. And in my opinion, that is the value of that, more so. And of course, as we talked about as well, there's also the legalized drugs movement. And I want to mention some of this because some people were like, oh, well, look, I know it's normal these days to an extent. I know people like to smoke their marijuana and stuff. It's become culturally normalized for America, but it's actually causing a lot of problems for us. And one of the arguments for legalizing pot in a lot of the U.S. was, you know what, if you legalize it, the cartels will go away. If you legalize it, the crime rings that focus on that will just die. If you legalize it, just like the just like the era where you had, of course, alcohol, made illegal, and the Italian mafia started running the rings smuggling in alcohol into the U.S. in different areas. If you legalize it, the natural market will get rid of that type of crime. It didn't happen. It didn't happen. What has happened instead is they legalized it, and the Mexican cartels have moved their operations into the United States. They legalized it, and they found that it's made crime and drugs worse. They legalized it, and they're finding that not only did it not get rid of the problems, it made every single one of them much more dangerous, much more real, much more right in front of our faces. And we're now facing another crisis from this, I think, in this country. Not only that, but because, a lot of police would say that, marijuana, maybe it makes you not really have a drive, right? Maybe you don't want to aspire towards as much as you maybe would normally. But, it doesn't hurt anybody. That's the narrative, right? I'd say data suggests it actually causes you to be more violent. But, and that's real data, by the way. But you also have the issue where it's a gateway. And a lot of people who are arrested on drug charges, arresting them also prevents things like murders and robberies and so on like that. And the ability of police to arrest people for those crimes prevented oftentimes worse crimes. That's the narrative from the police. Now, the post-millennial says this, based on this and where we're at with this narrative. It says, in 2020, voters in Oregon passed Measure 110, which decriminalized the possession of certain drugs in small quantities for personal use, and shuffled revenue from cannabis taxes to resources aimed at helping addicts. Sounds great on paper. They note that since it went into effect the following year, crime and substance abuse has not gone down as intended, and as a result, residents are calling for a reintroduction of criminal penalties for users. It says a poll conducted by DHM Research earlier this year revealed that more than 60% of Oregonians want to see the decriminalization aspect of Measure 110 repealed, though support for the use of cannabis taxes to fund treatment programs has maintained popularity. It says, according to the poll, 51% of those surveyed said they believe Measure 110 has been bad for Oregon. Of those, 33% deemed it very bad. Over 60% said drug addiction, homelessness, and crime had become worse in the time since it was adopted. And I can tell you, living in New York City, I walk to the office every day. The drug use, the open drug use, it's normal now to see people passed out, like just laying on the street. They look like they're dead sometimes, to the point where sometimes you see police checking on them, and you see just maybe tourists kind of like, prodding them and making sure they're okay. It looks like a zombie movie sometimes. And of course, late at night, it's very bizarre. I don't know what drug does it, but you see people like folded over in half, like they're hunched over, and they're just like their upper bodies are limp, but their lower bodies are still standing. I've never seen anything like it. It's really bizarre. But this is what the legalizing of drugs to an extent, or decriminalizing of drugs to an extent, looks like in New York. And you combine that with the fact that you're flooding the country with illegal immigrants who need to make money, and illegal immigrants who notably cannot legally work in many cases. I guarantee you're going to start seeing crime, you're going to start seeing robberies, you're going to start seeing people forming gangs, because this is typically how gangs and mafias start up, is through new immigrant populations who want to defend themselves or make money. And as this happens, supply and demand, and also legal loopholes that decriminalize criminal behavior. You're going to watch these things become much more severe as these individuals begin to organize within the country. We're importing, I'd say, the same type of crime and corruption that has caused the destabilization of a lot of Latin American countries, and frankly a lot of other countries in the world. That's my big concern with it. Now look, before we jump into questions, do not forget that on Tuesdays and Thursdays, I do the full episodes of Crossroads on YouTube, Facebook, and Twitter. So thank you all for being here. But if you want to see more Crossroads, including our exclusive interviews, well, make sure to head over to EpochTV, EpochTV.com. In fact, I'll be releasing an interview tonight with Dr. Robert Malone. That'll be 7 p.m. Eastern Time, exclusively on Epoch TV. We'll be talking about cognitive warfare. Now, it was a very interesting and in-depth interview, again, about how people are being manipulated psychologically. And it's a covert operation that's fighting to control your thinking and that of society. We go into as well how a lot of the establishment media have joined a very weird organization that coordinates all their coverage and the limits of what they can and cannot cover. A lot of people don't know this happened, but it is in existence. We talked about that tonight again. We're going to go deep into these issues and others. So again, join us on Epoch TV for that 7 p.m. Eastern Time tonight. The link to watch that is in the description and in the live chat. Now I'll go into questions, but first, here's from our sponsor.
Experts agree. One of the best ways to protect against financial uncertainty is to diversify your portfolio. Learn how physical gold and silver can secure your retirement funds from today's economic challenges. With a gold IRA from American Hartford Gold, you can safeguard your wealth with no penalties or taxes when you transfer your current qualifying retirement accounts. Call now and our precious metals specialists will send you a free information kit, no cost or obligation. American Hartford Gold, a trusted industry leader with an A+ from the Better Business Bureau, has a 5-star rating from thousands of happy clients. Whether you are getting physical precious metals in a gold IRA or delivered to your doorstep, we offer only the highest quality gold and silver. For your peace of mind, we also offer a no-fee buyback commitment, a low price guarantee, along with free shipping and free insurance. So don't wait. Call the number on your screen today and secure your financial future.
All right, folks, that's us jumping to some questions. And briefly, I apologize for the delayed start on today's episode. We had some technical issues. It just comes with the territory sometimes of doing a live show. But I apologize for that. I'm glad we got things working. So we're going a bit late today, so I hope you don't mind. First question from Angela Rotala. You're saying Christopher Wray of the FBI finally disclosed what Epoch has been talking about for a while regarding the CCP is targeting our infrastructure. Why do you think he is suddenly informing the American public about this when it has been going on for years? Well, yeah, it's been known for a very long time the Chinese Communist Party is targeting American critical infrastructure. The narrative is this. Critical infrastructure is the various systems that ensure the survivability of a nation or the ability to maintain a basic way of life. Critical infrastructure includes the electric grid. Critical infrastructure includes the water supply. It's the food supply. It's logistics, communications. The list could go on. There's quite a bit that falls under the definition of critical infrastructure. We know that other countries, the Chinese Communist Party, other hostile nations, and even just random hacker groups and terrorist groups are targeting and infiltrating American critical infrastructure. Part of the narrative of the CCP is that they go in and they steal certain intellectual property and then sell it or use it within their own businesses. The Chinese military carries out these types of operations. You might remember under the Obama administration, they went after 5 Chinese military hackers. That was Unit 61398 of the General Staff Department, 3rd Department. The General Staff Department being like the war-fighting branch of the Chinese military, the 3rd Department being the signals intelligence branch, and the Unit 61398 being one of the operational units within that under... They've changed it, actually. Since then, they've reorganized the military, but they still maintain these same types of operations. The basic way the Chinese hacker operations work is twofold. They will breach businesses and so on as Chinese military operations. They will then take the intellectual property, the information they found on how to build a truck and how to build a camera and how to build American military equipment, the things that take a lot of time and money to research and develop. They steal it. And then they give that to various research organizations at Chinese universities, organizations under the State Department. They have kind of reverse engineer labs that work on reverse engineering our intellectual property. And then once they're able to build that technology, they'll then hand it off to Chinese state-run businesses. And so Chinese businesses are intertwined with government and military in operations meant to rob and replace American companies on the market. Using this method, they are stealing the intellectual innovation of the United States, and they're trying to replace us in terms of on the market. Not only this, but some of the cases mentioned included wild things. For example, when these companies were outed, when the Chinese military was outed back, funny enough, under Obama of all people, they found that one of the examples given was a Chinese wind turbine company. You know those giant wind turbines they use in these wind farms and so on to generate renewable energy. And it's not renewable and it's not sustainable, by the way, but they call it that. They cause massive amounts of waste. They're not efficient in terms of cost. They don't even cover the costs to build them in terms of what they generate. And after you have to get rid of them after a while, you just have these huge just piles of garbage from them that are massive that you can't get rid of because of the dangerous, components within them, the toxic components. But anyways, the big issue is that the Chinese military had hacked an American wind turbine company, stole the designs of an American company to build those things, gave it to a Chinese company. The Chinese company built the turbines using information stolen by the Chinese military from an American company, and then outbid that American company they robbed for American contracts to build those wind turbines. And so, like, let that sink in. They robbed us. They stole this from a company, and then they used what they stole to outbid an American company that they robbed on American soil, paid for by U.S. tax dollars. Just emphasizing how incredibly sick some of our government officials are as they allow this to take place. That took place. And of course, currently the CCP still controls a lot of the green energy industry because they have a monopoly on the market when it comes to this stuff. That said, and also the rare earth minerals which they supply and which these things are dependent on. That they're not really rare, but it's extremely environmentally damaging to mine for them. It's just absolutely destructive to the water supplies and so on. And so a lot of countries, because of environmental regulations, they can't really mine for them the way that China does. And so because of that, China can provide them cheaper because they don't follow environmental standards, and they're able to sell them at a cheaper cost, and it puts the would-be competitors out of business and also makes technology affordable. That said, but of course that's businesses. Why are they allowing the breaching and so on of American infrastructure? I think it's because they understand now the risk of the CCP. That was, I believe, the awakening to this only took place during COVID. I think up until then, Republicans and Democrats, well, they understood the Chinese Communist Party was problematic, and they understood that there's a lot of really, really bad human rights abuses there. They didn't understand the extent to which the CCP is hostile towards the United States and to the free world. And remember, even up until the COVID outbreak, even Donald Trump, while waging a trade war on China, was still trying to make a deal with them. And it was only when COVID happened and the CCP launched its wolf warrior diplomacy operations and began even sanctioning U.S. officials, including the head, I believe, of the State Department at the time. It was only then that everybody realized, the U.S., Germany, Australia, other countries, that no, the CCP does not mean well, and this is a hostile nation that fully intends to destroy us when given the opportunity. And of course, the Chinese war plan, the CCP war plan against the United States, is what they call the Assassin's Mace. The Assassin's Mace specifically targets critical infrastructure. It specifically aims to eliminate critical infrastructure, our electric grid, our water supply, our logistic systems, so on, communications, so on. And by eliminating critical infrastructure to thereby disable the fighting capabilities of the United States. It's a way of fighting the American military without taking them head on. They call it the Assassin's Mace. And so, yeah, I think they've woken up a bit to the realities of that threat, even though folks like myself have been talking about this for a very long time. And, I don't know why. Maybe they just didn't fully believe us, I think, and until maybe it's a little too late, frankly. Ashley from California, you're saying, please explain where the U.S. is getting all these billions of dollars to give Ukraine, terrorists, illegals, etc. Are they borrowing or just printing money? How much are we paying in taxation and inflation to fund this? Yeah, well, if you look at the American budget for the government, it's spending far beyond its means. The spending of the U.S. government is not sustainable. In fact, even the interest we pay on taxes, even the interest we're paying, because again, of the nature of centralized banking, unfortunately, and because we're selling off, shares of the American economy, we're selling that off. We're paying more money just in interest, or about as much as we're paying for our defense budget. And the rate we're going of America going deeper and deeper and deeper into debt because the spending bills have money greater than what taxes bring in. As we go deeper and deeper into debt, that means more and more money paying into the system of interest rates. And of course, the federal government has a weird way of getting around this, and I blame it on the banking system, frankly. That the way the banking system works is that let's say there's $200 circulating currently, and those dollars are in, paper money. It's bank notes, which our money is, right? It's a Federal Reserve note issued by the Federal Reserve, not by the government. The Federal Reserve is neither federal nor a reserve. Once they print another $200, right, they double the amount of money in circulation, but the actual value of that money remains the same. The $400 then represents, collectively, the entire 400 represents what the 200 used to represent. And by using this method, they create inflation. You could say they create wealth on nothing. And of course, there's also an entire system through which they can create wealth on debt. They can create wealth even to an extent on like perceived income. When you get into things like fractional reserve banking, you bring up whole other issues like this. And frankly, I'd blame a lot of the problems on the absolutely corrupt, destructive, greedy, and I would say even criminal nature of centralized banking and what has been allowed. And I'd say it's only been allowed because of just mass corruption, personally, and because a lot of, I think, people who maybe would have problems with it can't fully wrap their heads around how the system actually works. Centralized banking, in my opinion, is one of the most evil forces in the history of this world. It has caused more problems, and it represents one of the greatest forms of theft ever committed, and it's being done by individuals who just plain old know how to game the system. Great book on that. Go read The Creature from Jekyll Island. Fantastic book, by the way. Let's see here. And it's a way, too, of robbing Americans of their savings. And so if you believe you have a good old pension, if you believe that you've saved and worked your entire life so you can retire happily, if you believe that you've put money in the bank and you're going to be okay, keep in mind that every 10 years, it may be even worse than this now, but every 10 years inflation doubles and the tangible value of your money is reduced by 50%. Every time they double inflation, every time they double the amount of money in circulation through printing money, they reduce the tangible value of your money by half. And so your $10,000 becomes worth $5,000, and then your $5,000 becomes worth $2,500, and so on every 10 years. And they continue doing that. Although I do think there's a cap on it. I do think we're going to reach a point where, frankly, they're going to have to file for, the government is going to become bankrupt. And we're probably going to see mass inflation and so on. But I think this could be solved more easily by eliminating centralized banking. I think centralized banking needs to go to the wayside, personally. And I understand the problems with that, but traditional banking does not bring about these same types of problems, I'd say. And some cultures, by the way, do not allow interest. Traditionally, Christians were not allowed to charge interest. Neither are Jews, but they interpret it as only applying to fellow Jews, at least on the Hasidic level, right? They believe that you cannot charge interest rates to fellow Jews. Christians used to believe you can't charge interest. I believe the line that restricts that is in the book of Ezekiel. Muslims also forbid charging interest. This used to be regarded as a sin. And of course, it was restricted through certain periods of human history. That being said, non-religious people in other countries and so on never really had a problem with it, even though it was regarded as a type of cheating people, a type of theft, basically taking advantage of the lack of knowledge or math skills of your intended victim. And of course, the dumbing down of America has made this much more easy, especially eliminating the integrity of our mathematics. Also, I would say that these days it's not even a religious issue. I don't think any culture fully restricts it anymore. Everybody does it. If you look at the investment firms and the banks, it's not going to be one religion or one culture. Everybody kind of does it these days. But keep in mind where we came from. This used to be considered robbery. It used to be considered theft, and it was even deemed a sin under at least the Abrahamic religions. Ashley from California, you're saying, oh, I already read that. Lane Ragsdale, you're saying it would be wise to stop calling USA a democracy ever. When I was in school, I would wonder, who are these Republicans? Are they subverting democracy? Vote Democrat. A lot of us thought that. You see, I have noticed younger and older people are thinking the same thing. Yeah, I know. This argument goes back to the very beginning of the United States. The Democratic societies were regarded as a movement intended to overthrow the federal government and to overthrow the Constitution. George Washington regarded them as the greatest threat to the United States, the Democrat societies. In fact, as I mentioned previously, he even believed the Whiskey Rebellion was started by the Democrat societies. The Democrat societies were an anti-republic movement. They wanted democracy rather than a republic. And of course, part of this ties into the debate on what type of government America would adopt, whether we adopt something similar to the Athenian democracy or to the Roman Republic. The Founding Fathers eventually settled on a system similar to that of the Roman Republic. And of course, the challenge is, how do you maintain a republic? As Ben Franklin said, a republic if you can keep it, right? And my point being, this has always been a debate. And the Democrat societies have always been pushing this narrative through all of American history. It's unfortunately not well documented, actually. I know this mainly from reading George Washington's letters, frankly, and also just based on reading his letters, also, of course, researching the history of these things in some older history books. This is not well known or well documented, unfortunately, in modern texts, but you can find it mentioned very heavily in older history books. But yeah, I agree, we should call America a constitutional republic. The loophole with that is that the election system is a democratic process. A republic is what you would call it's called representative democracy. And some people, of course, simplify that by saying our democracy. But I agree that does cause a lot of confusion. I did a special feature on this if you want to watch it. The special feature is called America Rewritten. And in that special feature, I show you the letters, the history, the documents that explain the difference between a republic and a democracy. And in that special feature, I raised the question of whether we're risking losing our American republic as people come to not even understand what a republic is. I think it's a very important feature that maybe I didn't push hard enough. I think it's actually an important feature that clarifies a lot of the misunderstandings of what America is. Again, you can watch that on Epoch TV, EpochTV.com, and that special feature is again called America Rewritten. All right, folks, that said, that's all for today. Tune in tonight, 7 p.m. Eastern Time. I'm going to be airing on Epoch TV an interview I did with Dr. Robert Malone. He has a new show he's starting with Epoch TV, which is called Fallout. And the first episode with him, we did the interview. We're talking about cognitive warfare, a very important topic, especially as we face what I would deem government brainwashing programs through the guise of a public-private partnership with many of the establishment media outlets. It's an important episode. Be sure to watch it, 7 p.m. Eastern Time, only on Epoch TV. And of course, I will see you all tomorrow, 10:30 a.m. Eastern Time. Thank you all so much for being here. And as always, please share this episode. And again, thank you so much, folks. I appreciate all of you. Please take care of yourselves, stay informed, and stay free. Thank you.